mark of any incredible power shonen is a power system you can remember, or more specifically, moves you can remember. In Naruto, there was the Shadow Clone, the Rasengan, and Chidori. In Dragon Ball, there was the Fusion Dance and the Kamehameha. And in JJK, which is rapidly becoming one of the most popular anime and manga in the world right now, there's domain expansions. You see, a domain expansion is the pinnacle of curse technique in the JJK universe. An ability that's supposed to be rare, which basically symbolizes the end of the fight if used on a non-special grade curse or sorcery. These techniques bring together all of the strongest abilities in Jujutsu sorcery into one neat little package. And much in the same way as a well-placed Kamehameha or a well-placed Rasengan, a well-placed domain expansion is one of the most satisfying things we can experience in the JJK universe. Watching Sukuna pull out Malevolent Shrine or Gojo pull out Unlimited Void is one of the more fun things I've got to experience in anime manga in the last couple of years. But even though these techniques are relatively rare, we've seen 11 throughout the course of JJK's manga. And the beauty of domain expansions is that they're incredibly individual, with each domain expansion being perfectly tailored to the person expanding their domain. But with strong abilities that are individual to the person using them, people are naturally gonna wonder, which is the strongest? And also considering the fact that most of these domain expansions are incredibly complicated, there's a lot of people scratching their heads wondering how any of them work. So today, I'm gonna sit down and tackle the very complicated and very convoluted task of ranking and explaining every single domain expansion in JJK. Now, the manga is about 150 or so chapters ahead of the anime, so about half of these domain expansions are gonna be from the manga. Well, I'm not gonna be talking about what happens in these domain expansions and trying to avoid spoilers the best I can. Well, we are slightly heading into spoiler territory. So proceed with caution, but once again, I will be avoiding spoilers to the best of my abilities. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And while you're click-clacking away at those keys, guys, go ahead and follow my brand new podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. Even though they're hailed as the strongest jujutsu ability in all of JJK, a couple of them have to be weaker than others. And honestly, as far as domain expansion strengths, they seem directly proportional to the strength of the sorcerer or the cursed spirit, which makes sense when we consider the fact that a domain expansion is just the expansion of one's own personal domain. But even using those words in that sequence doesn't mean a lot to everybody. So before we dive into ranking and explaining every single domain expansion, let's quickly go over what a domain expansion is, because we're going to be explaining every single domain expansion, so having a basic understanding of what they are in the first place, kind of a good idea. So in the very simplest of terms, a domain expansion is a barrier technique. That is to say that the Jujutsu sorcerer or cursed spirit creates a barrier with their own innate domain. A barrier being a bubble around them of sorts. And barrier techniques are their own classification within Jujutsu sorceries. When you think of a barrier, you probably think of like a wall or a door. But barrier techniques within Jujutsu Kaisen can be massively different, with some being really small and some being really big, some stopping outsiders from coming in and others stopping insiders from going out. Think of a barrier technique as a wall with rules which better Jujutsu sorcerers and cursed spirits can control. And the more specific those rules are, the stronger the wall gets. That is to say that if you were to use a barrier technique that was built only to keep one person out, but let every other person or cursed spirit in or out, then that barrier technique would be very strong against that one individual person. So a domain expansion is a barrier created with your innate domain. Which leaves us with the next question: what is an innate domain? Well, it's a metaphysical territory that exists in the user of the domain expansion's mind. So in essence, think of the innate domain as your consciousness, and therefore domain expansion is a barrier technique built out of your own consciousness, which is why domain expansions are highly individual. And while domain expansions are highly individual, they all come with a certain set of rules. Within the confines of your own domain expansion, your Jujutsu sorcery gets stronger. On top of that, your Jujutsu techniques cannot be avoided, meaning any sorcery that you fling at somebody in your domain expansion either has to be deflected or will simply just hit them. This is referred to in the JJK manga as the guaranteed hit. So in super layman's term, a domain expansion is the extension of your own consciousness, one that guarantees that your Jujutsu sorceries will hit your opponents, with everything from lethal to non-lethal to incomplete domain. domains. But I actually have an entire video explaining all of these different kinds of domains and how they work and the history of domains on my other channel, NCHammer23. You can find the video right there. So if you're curious about how we got to this stage of domain expansions or the different kinds of domain expansions, go check that out. But now that we, in its simplest way, understand domain expansions, let's get into ranking and explaining them. And coming in at last place at 11th is Horizon of Captivating Skanda. It's also in last place in terms of name, because what does that even mean? This domain expansion is used by Dagon, a cursed spirit under the control of Geto. Well, sort of. I'm not gonna explain it. This is one of the larger domain expansions we've ever seen, as when Dagon creates this domain expansion, it basically creates an entire tropical island, with a picturesque white sand beach on one side and a massive ocean on the other. And this is actually one of the few domain expansions we've seen in the anime thus far, as Geto and Mahito and the rest of his cursed spirit all use this domain expansion as a pseudo meeting place. And why wouldn't you? It's gorgeous. But it's also incredibly dangerous, that is, if Dagon wants you dead. See, because Dagon is a fish cursed spirit. To get more specific than that, he is an unregistered special grade created from fear of waterborne natural disasters like tsunamis. On top of that, he's also a cursed womb, but I am not even going to try to explain what cursed womb is within the confines of this video. It requires its own video entirely. Once Dagon becomes fully realized, he's able to create Shikigami, much in the same way as Megumi with his 10 Shadows technique. However, the Shikigami that Dagon creates are all fish-based, and within the confines of his domain expansion, those fish-based Shikigami have a guaranteed hit, meaning that within this domain expansion, Dagon can create as many fish-based Shikigami as he wants, and all of them will proceed to attack whoever he dragged into the domain expansion with him with a guaranteed hit rate. And this technique is powerful. I mean, very powerful. Powerful enough that Nanami, Maki, and now Bito Zenin are all put on the defensive by this technique. But considering the fact that none of them themselves have a domain expansion, that's kind of just how it goes. The true power of this domain expansion is the sheer amount of Shikigami that Dagon can create. And the Shikigami are nothing to scoff at, especially when you consider the fact that they have a guaranteed hit. Genuinely, the only way to battle against this technique is to try and pull off your own domain expansion within it and nullify the guaranteed hit of the Shikigami. Because as long as there is a push and pull for who's controlling the domain you're currently existing in, the guaranteed hit on both sides is nullified. And even though this technique is very powerful as far as domain expansions go, it's nothing serious. And sticking with the theme of cursed spirits who have domain expansions, coming up at number 10, we have the Smallpox Deities domain expansion, Graveyard Domain, is at least what we've kind of pseudo-dubbed the Smallpox Deities domain expansion's name to be. Because the domain expansion of the Smallpox Deity is never really named. You see, the Smallpox Deity is another special grade cursed spirit being controlled by kind of Geto. And what the Smallpox Deity is based on in terms of being a cursed spirit, significantly easier to guess than that for Dagon. The Smallpox Deity was created from the fear of the smallpox, and all of the abilities of the Smallpox Deity revolve around smallpox. Once the Smallpox Deity expands its domain and catches a couple of people in it, it starts to use the same abilities it used before it expanded its domain, but now with a guaranteed hit rate. So in order to explain how the Smallpox Deity's domain works, we should probably understand its innate technique, which is shoving people in coffins. You see, the Smallpox Deity is able to essentially summon a cramped coffin around you. It then summons a gravestone above that coffin and slams it into the ground. Upon that coffin being slammed into the ground, the Smallpox Deity starts a count to 3. If you don't break out of that coffin in those 3 seconds, you contract smallpox and die. And this is exactly how its domain works. Except now, instead of being able to dodge the coffins, they are guaranteed hit. Which means that so long as you exist within the domain of the Smallpox Deity, you are constantly being shoved into a coffin you have to escape in around 3 seconds. And having to break out of a coffin that's been dug into the ground sounds terrifying, but for your average grade 1 or special grade Jujutsu sorcerer, it's really not that tough. Mei is a grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer. You know, the teacher with the big braid in front of her face who really likes crows? She's shown basically with raw strength alone, breaking out of these coffins in under 3 seconds multiple times. There's also the fact that this domain only targets the person with the highest amount of cursed energy. So 1 person at a time. So once again, when it comes to domain expansions, nothing special. Now our next entry is something special, but maybe not in the right way. Because coming in at number 9, we have Deadly Sentencing. Deadly Sentencing is our first non-lethal domain expansion. Dagon's domain expansion is referred to as a calm domain, but it's still very much a lethal domain expansion. And this domain expansion belongs to Hiromi Higuruma, Higuruma, a public defender. This is our first legitimately complicated domain expansion. See, like I've already stated, this domain expansion is non-lethal. And essentially, upon this domain expansion being created, Hiromi becomes a prosecutor and the people caught in this domain expansion become the accused, also known as a defendant. Now, this technique does not have a guaranteed hit, though it does have rules, specifically that no violence is allowed, meaning that if you don't have your own domain expansion to counteract these rules, you can't attack Hiromi. And once this domain is fully cast, a Shikigami by the name of Judgman appears and announces crimes that the defendant may or may not have done. In the case of Yuji, who gets caught in this domain, Judgman accuses him of going into a pachinko slot casino while under 18. Now, Judgman knows everything about Yuji's life, so Judgman actually already knows if Yuji is guilty or not. However, the caster Hiromi doesn't know if Yuji is innocent or not. It is up to the defendant to prove to Judgman that they are innocent of this crime, which they can do by lying, or telling the truth if they're actually innocent, or providing evidence that they simply were not there. They can also confess to the crime for the possibility of a lessened punishment. But outside of the prosecutor and the defendant arguing whether or not the defendant has done it, Judgman also provides the prosecutor with a piece of evidence, which the defendant will have to rebuke. Now, if the defendant is found guilty, and usually this is what happens, because they're not lawyers and Hiromi very much is, the defendant is charged with a lawful verdict. Now, one of the punishments we've seen Judgman use is confiscation, which confiscates the curse techniques of the defendant, making it significantly easier for Hiromi to kill them. However, if the defendant is found guilty without an open confession, like I did exactly what you're accusing me of, the defendant can request a retrial that Judgman cannot deny. However, if what you're found guilty of is really bad, you can get confiscation plus death penalty, where not only is your cursed energy taken from you, but Hiromi is given an executioner's sword, a sword made out of cursed energy that one hit from kills you immediately. So being able to take somebody's cursed technique and having a sword that kills people in one hit sounds kind of broken. And for all intents and purposes, it kind of is. But mind you, the defendant still has a case to defend themselves, meaning that so long as the defendant is intelligent or knows where they've been or is even quite possibly innocent, means that this domain expansion simply won't work on them. On top of that, there's no guaranteed hit. Even if your cursed energy is taken, you can simply dodge. So if you're strong and fast like Yuji, it's really not that much of an issue. Lastly, Hiromi isn't that powerful as far as Jujutsu sorcerers go. I mean, he is, but if we're talking about the highest level, he's not that powerful. Meaning that if anybody else had a domain expansion or even simply a simple domain, they would be able to get excluded from Judgman's rules, implying that with just the simple use of a simple domain, they could jump Hiromi. So while this domain expansion is incredible, yet very complicated, it's also not that powerful. Well, not nearly as powerful as our next entry on the list, because coming in at number 8, we have Chimera Shadow Garden.
Nick, you're putting Chimera Shadow Garden at 8? Are you smoking crack?
Listen, I fully understand the power that Chimera Shadow Garden might be able to garner for Megumi one day, especially now manga readers know what I'm talking about. But if I'm being entirely real, the reason I'm putting Chimera Shadow Garden this low on the list is because Megumi can hold it for like 35 seconds. We know from Sukuna that incomplete domains can be insanely powerful. Well, Malevolent Shrine isn't incomplete, but it's not a closed off barrier. Having a way to escape a domain expansion actually makes a domain expansion stronger, which sounds dumb, but cursed energy and Nen work very similarly. If there's risk, the ability gets stronger. And if somebody can kind of just walk out of your domain expansion, there's risk of them getting out. But how does Megumi's domain expansion work? Well, once again, it is the only incomplete domain expansion we're going to be talking about on this list. But it works by Megumi creating thick, viscous shadows that funnel out of him and fill an area. And as this technically isn't a barrier technique, Megumi's range is kind of massive, being able to fill entire gyms with these thick, fluid shadows. And as Megumi is a user of the 10 shadows technique, he's able to summon all of his Shikigami through these shadows. He's also able to take complete and total control over all of these shadows that he summoned. And standing on these shadows is a very bad idea, because these are shadows. They're not water, they're not land, they're not even air. There's no buoyancy, resistance, or oxygen, meaning that if anybody caught in Chimera Shadow Guard doesn't reinforce their feet with cursed energy, like a ninja standing on water in Naruto, they will fall into Megumi's shadow, where they will fall forever. And that's it. GG's. You simply tumble through a black, limitless void with no buoyancy or oxygen. Now, this domain expansion has no barrier, like we've already talked about, and no guaranteed hit. It's kind of just a buff to Megumi and his 10 Shadows technique. But that doesn't mean that Megumi's domain expansion can't be closed off. See, if Megumi was in my room, he could fill my entire room with his shadows. And as his shadows converged, it would make a domain. So Megumi, in order to close off his domain expansion, has to find something to fill with his shadows. And Megumi in his own domain expansion is able to access 120% of his maximum potential, meaning his 10 Shadows techniques, his ability to conjure Shikigami, all significantly more powerful. The real drawback with Megumi's domain expansion is that anything dropped into it, Megumi has to bear the weight of, as it is his shadow. Meaning that if somebody were to fall into his shadow and fall forever, Megumi would have to bear their weight until he closed off his domain. So while this obviously gives Megumi a boost to what is one of the strongest techniques in the entirety of JJK, the 10 Shadows technique, it being incomplete, having no guaranteed hit, and forcing Megumi to bear the weight of whatever falls into his shadow is why it's so low. But Chimera Shadow Garden is too easy to explain. Let's get back to the complicated domains. Because coming up at number 7, we have Time Cell Moon Palace. Before I explain to you how this domain expansion works, I have to explain to you the abilities of Naoya. Now, I've actually never said it out loud. Naoya Zeni. Naoya, that's totally what I said. Naoya is probably the most powerful member of the Zenin family, the family that cast out Maki and Mai, and a lot of his strength came from a curse technique that he inherited from another Zenin family member, Naobito. See, Naoya is a special grade 1 sorcerer, and as a member of the big 3 families, he was born with incredible cursed energy, which he uses to power his projection sorcery. Projection sorcery is complicated, which would just be the tagline of Jujutsu Kaisen. Complicated. The way that it works is that Naoya sees the world in 24 FPS, which is kind of low. Most of you are probably watching this video at 30 to 60 FPS, with gaming computers playing video games up to 120 to 240 FPS. So really, everything after around 120 is imperceptible to the human eye. Because while it's kind of hard to agree on, scientists concur that most human eyes see the world at 30 to 60 frames per second. But Naoya is able to force everybody into his 24 FPS world. See, anybody that Naoya touches with the palm of his hand has to abide by the 24 FPS rule, meaning they have to move at exactly 24 FPS. And if they move faster or slower than 24 FPS, they will freeze into a picture of sorts for 1 second, meaning that this technique forces you to move at an exact speed that you may or may not be used to, and if you don't, you get frozen for a full second every time you break out of that FPS range. Therefore, his domain expansion amplifies his innate technique and adds something new. See, much in the same way that within Mahito's domain expansion, he doesn't have to touch you to transfigure your soul, within the confines of Time Cell Moon Palace, you are essentially being immediately touched by Naoya's palm, meaning that within this domain expansion, you have to move at 24 frames per second. On top of that, his domain expansion also has a direct attack, a guaranteed hit direct attack, mind you, which is also unblockable, because this direct attack fires film gauges at whoever is in the domain expansion. And if these film gauges make contact with the human body, it attacks that human body on a cellular level, forcing all of the cells in a person's body to try and abide by projection sorcery, meaning that simply being hit by one of these film gauges puts your entire body through a massive amount of damage, because your body does not operate at 24 FPS. And for those of you confused by the 24 FPS rule, essentially if you're being placed under this projection sorcery, you have to make exactly 24 precise movements in 1 second. Now, these movements don't have to be something big like this, it could be a twitch of a finger, but you have to make exactly 24 precise movements, or stand absolutely still. And while this domain expansion isn't the strongest domain expansion, it's probably the last one I would want to be caught in, because I just know I'm not smart enough to figure it out. Coming up after that, we have arguably the least complicated domain expansion on this entire list, Coffin of the Iron Mountain at number 6. Now, this domain expansion belongs to Jogo, the special grade cursed spirit that operates under Geto. Now, this domain expansion basically just creates an active volcano, and the inside of this domain expansion is said to be so hot that any average Jujutsu sorcerer would be burnt to ash in a matter of moments. But outside of just the sheer heat of this domain expansion, there's also a guaranteed hit, as Jogo is able to control all of the magma within this volcano, which he can launch at those in his domain with a guaranteed hit. And that's it. Simple, straight to the point, very powerful. As long as you're not going up against Jogo or Sukuna, who would be able to outpower your domain with their own, this would kill 99% of people you would catch in your domain. It's just Jogo's kind of unlucky. But speaking of special grade cursed spirits that serve under Geto, next we have Mahito's domain expansion at number 4, also known as the self-embodiment of perfection. This technique, also fortunately, very simple. Also, this is number 5, not 4.
Oh god, number 4 is Hikari's domain expansion. I don't want to explain the rules of pachinko.
Let's talk about Mahito first. Mahito has the ability to transfigure souls, meaning that anybody who Mahito touches, he's able to shape the form of their soul. Remember what he did to Junpei? And you thought he was gonna be a part of the crew. And through this process, Mahito is able to make transfigured humans. People Mahito is basically able to turn into cursed spirits and then direct. But in order to pull this off, Mahito has to touch somebody. But that's not the case within his domain expansion. You see, since the domain expansion is the expansion of your own innate domain, which is basically just your body, within the confines of the self-embodiment of perfection, Mahito is touching everything. Meaning that Mahito is able to Junpei anybody within his domain expansion like that. And if you don't have a simple domain or a domain expansion of your own, well, you're joining Junpei. Not to mention that, like with any domain expansion, within the confines of self-embodiment of perfection, Mahito's ability to transfigure humans is greatly improved. So you're gonna get extra Junpei.
Should we get to Hikari's domain expansion?
Just for premise, for those of you who aren't caught up in the manga, this domain expansion could have its own video. And personally, I don't understand the rules of pachinko. I'm gonna have to go read what the rules of pachinko are in order to figure out how this domain expansion works. So it's nighttime now, but I understand it. So gambling is forbidden in Japan. So instead they have pachinko, which is basically Japanese slots. And the way that pachinko works is that you put money in and you get a certain amount of small silver balls. The purpose of pachinko is to fire these small silver balls up, and then they basically go down a plinko board. You know, the things where you drop a disc in and it bounces around and you try and get it in the jackpot area? Well, that's basically what pachinko is, but times 1,000. So the goal of pachinko is to try and get as many of these silver balls in the jackpot area at the bottom of your little plinko board. And the goal of pachinko is to try and hit as many jackpots with the amount of balls that you have. But in order to get a jackpot, you have to get one of those balls in the little area and then spin for a jackpot. And every single pachinko machine has a different level of possibility for that spin to end in a jackpot. And pachinko machines all have themes. There's Gundam pachinko, there's Baki pachinko, but Hakari chooses it to be a romance shoujo, meaning that it's basically a romantic role-playing game, and based off the decisions you make, you get to romance a part. In the case of Hakari's domain expansion, there are 7 love interests, numbered 1 through 7. The goal of these rolls is to roll 3 of the same number, and if Hakari rolls 3 of the same number, he gets a bonus. Now, these bonuses depend on which of the 7 numbers Hakari rolls, but these bonuses can be anything from faster rolls to better luck. And these bonuses are stackable, which means that the longer that Hakari exists in his domain expansion, the more bonuses he gets, which make his domain expansion even stronger. But pachinko games also have a thing called reach mode, where let's say hypothetically you roll a 6, and a 5. The pachinko machine will enter reach mode, where it will spin again for that 3rd number to see if you'll get it. So let's say Hakari gets the first 2 numbers of a 3 slot. His domain expansion will enter reach mode and it'll spin again to try and give him the 3. When a reach mode is activated, a scene plays out. And during this scene, colors are very important. See, if a green ball or train door or red ball or train door or gold door or train door are shown, very different things could happen. See, green in Hakari's domain expansion means low chance of a jackpot, while red means middle chance and gold means high chance. And a rainbow colored ball or train door means a guaranteed jackpot. Also, if in this reach mode, there is a 4th try, aka a 4th spin to try and get the 3rd number to be the same as the first 2 numbers. That is to say it's 6 and it spins and it's 5 and then it's 4 and then it's 3 and then it tries again. That is a guaranteed 6 spot. So basically, if there's a rainbow item in the cutscene or a 4th spin is done during reach mode, a jackpot is guaranteed for Hakari. It's like a pity pull in a gacha game. And this green, red, and gold mechanism confers to actual percentages, with the gold doors or ball or combo counter implying an 80% chance of a jackpot. And those jackpots can be things like a damage nullification or speed increases or power boosts. But the TLDR of it all is that if Hakari hits enough jackpots using luck, he becomes invulnerable for 4 minutes. minutes. On top of that, his curse energy is limitless. He enters in unkillable mode. And as he is already relatively close to being a special grade sorcerer, making him unkillable and also have unlimited cursed energy makes him terrifying for 4 minutes. And considering the fact that this domain expansion only gets stronger the longer it goes because bonuses stack for Hakari, means it is easily one of the most powerful domain expansions we've ever seen. And I never want to try to explain it ever again. Coming up after Idle Death Gamble, we have Womb Profusion. Now this is the domain expansion of Ghetto. We know very little about it. In fact, we've only ever seen it used once, and we didn't even actually really get to see it get used. Ghetto decided to use this domain expansion to counter another barrier. It's an open barrier type similar to that of Malevolent Shrine. We just don't really know what it does. But considering the fact of who was using it and what it was able to undo in terms of barrier techniques, means it's gonna make a top 3 on the list here. But since we're talking about open barrier types like Malevolent Shrine, let's get to our number 2 spot, Malevolent Shrine. God, I love simple domains. Malevolent Shrine is by far and away one of the strongest domains in JJK. Most likely because it belongs to Sukuna, the quite literal king of curses, but also because it's an open barrier type, which is rare amongst domain expansions. So while it is technically possible to just walk out of Malevolent Shrine since there's no barrier keeping you in, unfortunately, that's probably not gonna happen for you. See, Malevolent Shrine has 2 abilities, Cleave and Dismantle. Dismantle attacks any inanimate objects within Malevolent Shrine, while anything with cursed energy is attacked by Cleave, meaning anything within 200 meters of Sukuna gets destroyed. And that's 200 meters in all directions. See, by making the barrier open-ended, Sukuna is basically making a binding vow to allow escape from his domain expansion. However, this is still a guaranteed hit domain. So by making a binding vow to allow people to technically walk out of his domain, he's increased the range to 200 meters. So inanimate or living, if you're within 200 meters of Sukuna, you're gonna get destroyed. Unless, of course, you have a domain expansion stronger than that of Sukuna's, or you can use simple domain to negate the guaranteed hit effect. There's only one person on Earth who could get in a domain battle with Sukuna and probably win, and that's the person holding our number 1 spot, Gojo. And more importantly, Gojo's domain expansion, Unlimited Void. Gojo is a cheat code when it comes down to it. There's nothing he's not good at. There's nothing he can't accomplish. That's actually canon. It is a canon fact that Gojo is good at anything he tries, and that he doesn't play sports for the younger generation, because if he played sports, he would be the greatest of all time. The Unlimited Void brings anybody drawn into Gojo's domain expansion into the Limitless, which is infinity. It's everything. The Limitless is what the Gojo family manipulates. However, it can't truly be controlled unless you have the 6 eyes. And I've explained both the Limitless and the 6 eyes in this video right here. But by bringing somebody into the Limitless, they are flooded with the knowledge of the entire universe. As once again, the Limitless is everything. It's a vast void of infinite knowledge. Therefore, those who are brought into the Limitless using Unlimited Void have a massive amount, an infinite amount of information forced into their head. During the Shibuya incident, Gojo activated the Unlimited Void for 0.2 seconds. And in those 0.2 seconds, everybody caught in his domain expansion was flooded with 6 months of information, meaning that every second in Unlimited Void floods the people brought into Unlimited Void with 2.5 years of information. This flood of information completely incapacitates anybody brought into the Void. And as Gojo can move within his own domain expansion, he can simply just pop their head off. Not to mention, even after Unlimited Void has been deactivated, people are unable to move. As in the Shibuya incident, for 300 seconds after deactivating Unlimited Void, Gojo was able to kill 1,000 transfigured humans, meaning after only being exposed to a domain expansion of 0.2 seconds, 1,000 transfigured humans weren't able to move for 300 seconds at least. And the information flooded into somebody's brain in the Unlimited Void loops endlessly, meaning that if hypothetically you spend enough time in the domain expansion to receive all of the information of the universe, it just starts again. And the irony is, since you learn everything about the entire universe, you understand exactly how Unlimited Void works. You also understand exactly how Gojo's abilities work, which ironically makes Unlimited Void stronger, as revealing how your techniques and more importantly how your domain expansion works strengthens those things. So as you're force-fed all of this information in a matter of seconds, it gets stronger and forces you more information. It's disgusting. Gojo is a cheat code. And that's it. All of the domain expansions in JJK ranked and explained. Do you guys agree with my list? Do you like my explanation of how pachinko works? I'm not super stoked on it. Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, Like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, if we're being entirely real, the mangaka of JJK didn't do a great job explaining Hakari's domain expansion either.